Hello, dear students. How is your day going? I hope that you are all well, and I hope that you are reading the material, specifically the poems, and that you are following up. And I hope we will meet as soon as God permits us. It's the first time that I have two lectures about the same poem, but actually, I tried to use this poem to practice more uh, literary skills related to poetry. I wanted to talk about some sound devices and some of the elements that we can find in a poem. Also, I wanted to say that this poem talks about an issue that you will be soon interested in as you start studying Survey of American Literature. And I think it's one of the important types of literature. We call it Black literature. Last time we said that we are going to sum up our analysis of the poem and we shall move to specific aspects of the poem. Claude McKay, the poet that we are talking about, tried to speak to his allies, to the people who share devotion to the cause of freedom, to fight their enemies and to let us say keep and preserve their humanity. By using a number of figures of speech, the poet was able to communicate his ideas. To sum up, the speaker in the poem talks to unnamed antagonists. He also invokes dogs, beginning as extended metaphor involving non-human creatures that will run throughout the poem. Here we notice the use of imagery. And if you still remember, we said that in poetry we have something we call the visual image. And the visual image here is that of mad and hungry dogs. And the use of dogs, and dogs is what we call the vehicle or المشبه به. The word dog suggests not a worthy creature, but a crazed, bloodthirsty, subhuman mass. And making their mock further emphasizes the enemy's viciousness and cruelty. And they will add insult on top of injury. So, what I'm trying to say is that using the word dog is not only meant to show cruelty, but also to insult those people who accept oppression, as people who accept dogs to ravish them or to dehumanize them. Now, by creating such a very powerful negative image from the beginning of the poem till the end of the poem, the speaker prepares the readers to be convinced of something and to convince them in a way that they must die by facing their enemy directly. So, this is exactly what the poem is all about. One of the things that I want to share with you is that many people who read this poem described it as an angry sonnet, even though everybody agrees that it's a carefully controlled poem in both structure and tone because it's a sonnet. Throughout the poem, the speaker is concerned with reaction to the almost certain condition of death. Certain means inevitable. No one is going to live forever. Also, we notice that this poem has a very well-built, well-knit structure. Each stanza deals with a theme, and all stanzas follow the structure of a good English sonnet. And this in itself is a challenge, how a black writer is able to write a sonnet that goes back in its form and structure to the old times when we had some big names in the history of English poetry, like John Milton, like William Shakespeare, and how he was able to write a poem following all the rules, at the same time communicating a theme against oppression. And I mean by oppression here, oppression of the white people to the black people. So the white are the oppressors and the black are the oppressed. We notice that this poem follows the same structure of the sonnet. You have three quatrains and one couplet. The rhyme scheme is that we find in any English sonnet. If you are looking at page 50 of your book, and here I have the poem on the screen, we notice that we have hogs, spot, dogs, lot. Let us start with the first four lines, which are the first quatrain. You know that if you want to know how we try to work out the rhyme scheme, we take the first letter of the alphabet, that is A, and we take the first line. So it is hogs. I say A. Spot is different, so it's B. Dogs is the same as hogs, so we go back. We go back to A. Lot is like a spot, so B. So the first quatrain is A, B, which means that line 1 rhymes with 3, line 2 rhymes with 4. If we go to the lines between 5 and 8, we notice that we have a new rhymes. So after B, what do we have? We have C. Die rhymes with defy, so we have C. Shed rhymes with dead, so we have D. So the second stanza is CD. Now let us go to the third stanza. And here I am talking about lines 9 till line 12. What do we have? Foe and blow, brave and grave. So this is something new. So we have, after the letter D, what do we have in the English alphabet? We have E. So if we go to line number 9, we have E. Line number 10, F. Then E, then F. So the third quatrain is EF. And then we have pack and back, so we have GG. So the rhyme scheme of this sonnet, which has 14 lines, is AB, CD, EF, GG. We also notice that the poet offered the problem in the first 12 lines and the solution in the couplet. And this is exactly what English sonnets usually do. And for your information, the great English sonneteer William Shakespeare was really famous for the effectiveness of his couplet. And I don't think I would be exaggerating if I said that Claude McKay's couplet in this poem is as effective as Shakespeare's couplets, because he concluded his poem by telling his allies that all the oppressed should unite in order to face up, in order to fight the enemies, even though they might be tortured by their enemies, but still they have to show bravery. This is a very effective way of ending his sonnet. So we notice that the poet arranged his poem in a very organized manner. The first four lines, the poet tries to say that he rejects dying like a hog if death is inevitable. This is the main idea of quatrain number 1. In quatrain number 2, we notice that the poet says that we should die nobly. in a noble way. And this thing, if we died a noble death, this would even exact the respect of our enemies. When we fight back, even our enemies are going to respect us. In stanza number 3, the poet says that he wants his people to opt for this earliest proposition, which is to deal the enemies even one blow in response to thousand blows. At least you have the honor of attempt. Okay, so we notice that the poet starts his poem by being logical and quiet, and we notice that he becomes more emotional, and I can say that he becomes angry at the end of the poem. So you can feel the angry tone at the end of the poem. Now, the reason why we have a second lecture devoted to this poem is to try and show you how this poem contains a lot of literary elements that we spoke about. And it's a good idea, after all, to apply what we studied on a specific poem. We noticed that this poem is so rich that you can speak about a lot of elements in it. Notice that the richness and the uniqueness of the poem also arises from the fact that the poet did not identify a specific setting for the poem. You remember from our study of short stories and fiction that literature usually offers a setting, a place, or a time when the thing happens. But this poem does not have any identified setting. And this makes the poem very suitable for any kind of conflict, or let me say, it would be suitable to talk about any form of oppression, whether we speak about those who are oppressed because their country has been occupied by enemies, or it could be suitable for the oppression of a certain race by another. Notice that the poem as a whole did not even mention the word black or white. Here you can look at your books, or you can see the screen here, that we don't have any reference to black or white, and this adds to the richness of the poem. Yani the poem is suitable for any time and any place. Also, when I taught you the short stories, uh, I remember I told you about tone. And here, this poem is also very suitable for talking about tone. If you remember, the tone shows the attitude of the poet or the writer towards what he writes. Obviously, the speaker here has a certain type of tone that you can feel, specifically if you read the poem carefully or if you read the poem twice. We notice that the tone is resolute, determined, and steadfast, with elevated and rousing language. We notice the beauty and the simplicity of the language, but the speaker seems to be determined and strong, and that's why the tone can be described by using words like resolute, steadfast, persistent, determined, with elevated language. We notice also that this poem shows a protagonist and an antagonist. Protagonist is the principal character in a literary work, and the antagonist is the person who is against the protagonist. Let me say, for example, the protagonist is the hero, and the antagonist is the one who can be described as the villain or the bad guy who works against the hero. So the speaker denounces his antagonist and attacks his antagonist, but he does not identify him. He says he is a common foe or enemy. And also, exactly like we find in short stories, here we can speak of a conflict. a conflict between the speaker and his kinsman. The speaker and his kinsman, if you notice that the speaker here talks about the word kinsman, and I'm trying to locate this here. Okay. Oh, kinsman, yes. The ninth line, if you look at the ninth line, oh, kinsman. O is apostrophe, okay, which is very much like nida in Arabic. Oh, kinsman. We also notice that kinsmen means relatives or people who are considered as a blood relation. So the major conflict is between the poet and his kinsmen on one side versus or against their common enemy. So in order to win this conflict, the poem involves the speaker's need to rally his allies, to gather his allies, the people who are supporting him, against a common enemy, and also to encourage them in the belief that fighting this kind of battle is worthwhile. It is an important action that they have to take. Also, one important aspect that we studied when we took short stories is the word climax. We notice that this poem is true to the Shakespearean sonnet form, where the resolution at the end of the poem should come at last, and this happens in the couplet. In the couplet, the speaker in the poem claims that he and his allies will face their enemies, and this is really an invitation to the people who are considered as his allies or his kinsmen. This is something like an invitation to them to face their enemy. And I will make it clear again and again that the poet is saying that you have two types of death. You are not being given a choice between life and death. Your oppressors will not allow you to survive or to live. So you have the choice between two types of death: to die like hogs or pigs, which are hunted and surrounded without raising a finger to defend themselves. And number two, the choice is to fight the monsters who are attacking you and to hit them one time, even if they hit you 1,000 times. It's wrong not to resist. And in this case, you will die also, but you will get the respect of your enemies. So the writer here is telling us that you are given a choice between two types of death: death with dignity or death without any dignity. Also, we notice that the poet speaks about a precious blood in the poem. Blood is precious. This is line number 6, if you notice. Definitely, you know the meaning of precious, huh? Like when we speak of jewels, we describe them as precious stones, something which is very, very expensive and very valuable. So, is blood something valuable or is it something cheap? And the poet in line number 6 says, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Do you remember our lecture about metonymy? When we said that something is metonymic of something else? You know, guys, like when you studied in your tawjih, probably something similar to kinaya in Arabic. So shedding a precious blood in vain is metonymic. Metonymic of what? Let me explain more. If your valuable blood goes for nothing, this is metonymic of what? The loss of the battle. So precious blood is metonymic um, of death. If someone loses his blood, then he died. So this is metonymic of not just the loss of blood, but also death. If someone loses his blood for nothing, it means that he died without a cause. He died without a cause. That is someone who dies without achieving anything. In addition to the use of metonymy in the poem, we also notice the use of personification. And remember, personification is a form of extended metaphor and implied metaphor as well. When you give human qualities, sensibilities, or characteristics to an animal or a thing. And here, the one who was personified is the dog. So the poet started with the dog thing, line number 3. He spoke of hungry dogs making their mock at our accursed lot. And then he speaks of even the monsters we defy. He personified the dogs as monsters. And this is one of the techniques used in the poem. Another thing that we find in the poem is hyperbole. And hyperbole means exaggeration. Yes, probably you know that. Exaggeration, when the poet or the writer exaggerates to achieve a certain purpose. So the speaker here uses exaggeration. And like all figures of speech, hyperbole is functional. In other words, I want you to know that any figure of speech has a function, and that's why it's used. So the exaggeration in the poem is describing the enemy as a great mass of monsters. A great mass of monsters, like they are one hand against the oppressed. And in the poem, if you notice, okay, I want to refer to a specific line. Line 11, and for their 1,000 blows, deal them one death blow. So here he exaggerates by describing the enemies as a mass of monsters, dealing their 1,000 blows. And this is a kind of exaggerated portrayal or depiction for the purpose of characterization, to characterize the enemies. Also, we notice one thing that I did not mention before, and probably I postpone this till the time when you study poetry, but there is no harm in mentioning this. There is something we call onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia, that is Onomatopoeia. And this is a sound device, something that relates to sound. And onomatopoeia means the sound suggests the meaning. Like when I say to you, what is the sound of the wolf? You will say howling. Howling. And remember, if you keep repeating howling, it's like the woo of the wolf. Also, it's like in Arabic when we say حفيف أوراق الشجر, it's the same idea. You know, there is a similarity between the sound and the word which is used for it. Also here in the poem, we notice that onomatopoeia or the sound suggests the meaning relates to the sounds of the animals. Yani a great portion of these words are related to animals. Okay, what I'm trying to say to you, that the poet used the word bark. Bark. And where did he use that? In line 3. He says, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs. So barking is the sound of the dog. B-A-R-K. Be careful. Don't confuse this with park. Park. Park is different from bark. Bark here is نباح الكلب. And نباح relates to this kind of sound اللي هو the sound suggests the meaning. يعني there is a connection between the sound and the meaning. And I want you to notice that in this line number 3, as you see here, we notice the use of the oral image. And oral is A-U-R-A-L. Oral image. We notice the use of the oral image here. You can imagine hogs being trapped by the dogs, surrounded by the dogs, and the dogs are barking, 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 barking. You can imagine that this is very, very harmonious and very onomatopoeic. Yani there is a connection between the cruelty and the sound. Notice the line that says if we must die, the first line. Let it not be like hogs. This means dying with honor and meaning. This is the thing you can achieve if you fight back. Until your enemy recognizes you and admits that you are courageous. Notice that if we must die is so important that it is repeated twice in the poem, and it's also the title of the poem. And giving the first line as a title, one reason why this happens in poetry is that this line is really important. Another effective thing is line 14, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back. We notice here that this means dying with honor and meaning. It means fighting back your enemy until your enemy recognizes you. Even though you know that your enemy is far stronger than yourself, much stronger than yourself. You have to fight even though you know that your enemy is stronger. Now, before we leave Claude McKay, I'm going to talk about the important themes of the poem. As I told you, this poem has all the elements of literature that you can think of. If we must die, actually, I don't know where to start. It has a lot of themes. One of them is expressed in the first line, which is the inevitability of death. Inevitability of death. I-N-E-V-I-T-A-B-I-L-I-T-Y. The inevitability of death. I think you know the adjective inevitable, like unavoidable, which is very much like when you say in Arabic حتمية الموت. Obviously, death in the poem is an important word and an important theme. It is even invoked in the title. It's between the first line and the last line, as I can see. And many times in between the first and the last, the word death was repeated. So there is this kind of impending death. Death is coming anyways. Is it a desire for death? I don't think so. But death, according to the speaker in the poem, will not be feared according to the speaker. He will go to death without hesitation, if this means defending his dignity. So the speaker in this poem really spends the 14 lines advocating for a noble death. that will allow the dead people to live on through their glory. Glory in death, seeking glory even in death. Yeah, and this is really an Anglo-Saxon theme. Another theme is the value of honor. Um, this poem really supports some notions of bravery, glory, and heroism. Uh, Despite the fact that your enemy might be very vicious, but still you have to do that. So our poet McKay here goes back to the old cultural traditions, arguing for a timeless sense of courage, which makes a meaningful death possible. Exactly like the ideas of patriotism and love of one's own country. You need to believe in that if you want to be independent. Um, One important theme that I want you to notice, and I really loved the way he presented it, is humanity and animality. It's our choice as human beings either to be animals or human. We notice that throughout the poem, the speaker encourages his allies or the people who follow him or who believe in him to realize that humanity should be achieved through heroic values. And he also condemns the enemy as vicious, inhuman monsters. Uh, so if we read the us, the pronoun us in the poem, as referring to African Americans, then these non-human descriptions condemn the racist rhetoric of time and assert that the racist whites are the ones who are actually subhuman and animal-like. If you don't acknowledge the humanity of others, then it's your fault. You are the one who is animal-like. So there is always a degrading equality in the culture that wants someone to be oppressed and the other to be the oppressor. So both of them lose humanity, the oppressed who doesn't defend himself and the oppressor who believes in the inferiority of other people. Another theme that is very clear, as old as hills actually, is the issue of masculinity. Masculine is an adjective we use for men. Notice that masculine is the opposite of feminine. The appeal to masculinity, or the idea that you should be a man, capital M. How can someone be a man? The poet wants his allies to die like men. Like men. And this is line 13 specifically. Die like men. What does he mean by men? They are men already. We notice that the idea of die like men in particular portrays, or let me say depicts, manliness as an ideal. And this ideal is not something you are born with. It is something you attain rather than a given condition of being a man. Okay? So, obviously, he attaches these values with masculinity. So, our speaker values honor, glory, and worth, and he ties them up with masculinity. So we don't know the position of women in the poem. If you are a feminist, you will be looking for the position of women. So whatever the position of women, it seems to me that McKay in this poem considers that this is a battle between men. and women have no role in it. Yes. Another obvious theme is the need for resistance. If We Must Die is a poem that encourages violent resistance. And the key word in the poem is defy. Do you see line number 7? We have the word defy. Yeah. Yani halfway through the poem, he encourages outright opposition. Something you should do right away, even when that means death. And very clearly, we see that the poet sees violence as justified when responding to murder and oppression. All right? I want to conclude by referring to the theme of freedom and free will. One of the lexical patterns that attracted my attention in the poem is the use of words like penned, P-E-N-N-E-D. This is line number 2. In line number 2, you have pinned. Also, you have pressed, line 14. These words are applied to both sides in the conflict, the oppressed and the oppressors. And to shape its negative depiction of surrender in the first quatrain, we notice that the poem relies not just on comparison to hogs, but on the sense that not resisting will mean being pinned and surrounded. Yani if you don't resist, you will be pinned and surrounded. And at the end of the poem, the speaker returns to the same image of constraint by speaking to press to the wall. Can you imagine when someone is arrested by the police and the police asks him to put his hands behind his back and then takes him and presses him to the wall? I think you can imagine that. But now encourages us to picture not an execution, but men fighting to their bitter end, bitter with I. That is, men are aware that they are going to die, but they are fighting. So the poem suggests something real. Death will never be absent from our lives. Death will come, regardless. So what's the connection between this and the freedom? Okay, let us see. The poet suggests that freedom comes in accepting fate and dying nobly. And this thing will force the oppressors to show you honor even after death. So by using words like if and let, if اللي هي conditional, let is a kind of imperative, the speaker is like someone who builds something. Let me say builds a house, builds a wall, whatever he builds. The speaker builds his case slowly, so that when he states in the last couplet, we will face the murderous cowardly pack, this is the last thing, the audience has presumably already decided to join him of their own accord. That is, the listeners have the same cause like himself, so they will agree actually to go with him for a fight. Okay? All right. So I gave a lot of time to this poem. But anyways, I wanted you to see how we can analyze a poem step by step. Thank you guys for being patient with me, with my detailed analysis of literature as usual. Thank you very much. This was our 11th lecture, which was a continuation of lecture 10. Thank you very much. See you next time with a new poem, and I think that we will be dealing with Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening by our poet Robert Frost. This is page 52. Till then, thank you. Goodbye.